She stormed up our driveway, red-faced and raging, holding a crumpled piece of paper in her hand like it was a warrant for our arrest. "You've been fined $2,000 for violating HOA trash bin policy," she shouted so loud that even the neighbors 2 houses down peeked out from behind their curtains. "And if you don't pay immediately, I'm calling the cops." Her voice was shrill, full of authority she thought she had. The paper trembled in her grip, her lips pressed in a tight line, like she'd rehearsed this confrontation in her mirror a dozen times. That was the moment I realized we had just met the infamous Karen of Chestnut Ridge. My wife and I exchanged glances from the porch. It had barely been 2 weeks since we moved into the neighborhood with our twin kids and golden retriever. We'd read about HOAs being strict, but this was next-level ridiculous. "Ma'am," my wife said politely, trying to keep her voice calm, "we didn't mean to break any rules. We just moved in, and we're still getting used to the schedule here." Karen raised an eyebrow like we just confessed to burning down the clubhouse. "Ignorance of the rules isn't an excuse," she snapped, pointing to our trash bin, which was sitting at the curb, apparently a few hours too early by their standards. "You people think just because you moved in from the outside, you can disrespect the order we've built here?" The way she said, "you people," made it clear this wasn't just about the trash bin. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. The mission came first. My wife gently pulled the kids back inside while I stood at the top of the steps. "So let me get this straight," I said calmly. "You fined us $2,000 for bringing out our trash early?" Karen scoffed. "Not just that. Your lawn is 1 inch too tall, your fence doesn't match HOA paint codes, and you have too many vehicles in the driveway. You're already racking up a list of violations." I glanced at our perfectly manicured lawn. We'd paid for professional landscaping the day we moved in. Our vehicles? All parked legally. And that fence? It had been approved by the previous HOA president, who had apparently resigned last month under mysterious circumstances. Karen had filled the vacuum like a vulture. She stepped closer, invading my space. "Pay the fine by tonight, or I'm calling the police. And don't think they'll go easy on you. Not in my neighborhood." She turned on her heel and marched off, already dialing her phone as she walked back to her house. I could hear her barking into the phone. "Yes, I need officers at 117 Willow Creek Drive. They're refusing to comply with community policy. I'm concerned for my safety." My fists clenched, but I kept my expression blank. Let her call the cops. Let her bring them here. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she had just threatened a federal agent. Actually, 2. Both my wife and I were deep cover operatives, assigned to an active federal investigation. Our move to Chestnut Ridge wasn't just for comfort or schools, we were here for a reason, and Karen had just volunteered herself for a starring role. But blowing cover over a trash bin? That wasn't part of the plan. I stepped back inside, closing the door gently behind me. My wife looked up from her phone. "She really called 911? I nodded. "Yep. Wants to arrest us over a garbage can." She shook her head, half amused, half annoyed. "She's making our job a whole lot easier." "Or a whole lot messier," I replied. I peeked through the curtain as 2 black and white cruisers turned into our cul-de-sac. Let's see how Chestnut Ridge's justice system handles this one. The kids were upstairs, oblivious to the neighborhood drama unfolding. I walked back outside just as the police officers stepped out of their vehicles. They looked confused, probably expecting a domestic disturbance or an active threat, not an HOA complaint over trash bins. Karen rushed up to them like she was welcoming royalty. "Officers. Thank God you're here. That man is refusing to comply with multiple violations. He's unstable, possibly dangerous, and I think they're illegal tenants." One officer raised an eyebrow. "Illegal tenants?" "Yes." Karen insisted. They're not listed in the HOA registry, they refuse to pay fines, and they've been spying on my property. That last one made me smirk. We were spying, but not on her roses. I walked down to greet the officers. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Everything okay? One officer glanced between Karen and me. We got a call about a civil dispute? Karen practically jumped between us. He's not allowed to speak. Arrest him. He's hostile. Ma'am, the taller officer said, his patience thinning, you called us over an HOA violation. That's not a criminal matter. But they're a threat to the community. Karen shouted. They're hiding something. Look at them. She pointed like she'd just discovered a national scandal. That's when I decided enough was enough. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my badge. Special Agent Walker, Homeland Security. I held it out calmly, letting them read it for themselves. Karen took a step back like I'd slapped her. My tone stayed steady. I'm not here to cause problems, officers. We've been placed here under a classified federal investigation. This neighborhood was chosen for strategic reasons. And this woman just tried to have a federal agent arrested over a trash bin. The silence was immediate and deep. One officer looked at his partner, unsure what to say. Karen looked like she'd seen a ghost. Her confidence evaporated in seconds. I didn't know, she stammered. You don't look like agents, that's the point of being undercover, I said. I turned to the officers. We appreciate your response, but I think we've cleared up this misunderstanding. The officers nodded and left, visibly annoyed that their time had been wasted. Karen just stood there, mouth open, eyes wide. For once, she had nothing to say. As I walked back up the driveway, I knew one thing for sure. This mission had just gotten a lot more interesting. The next morning started early, just after sunrise. My wife brewed coffee while I sat at the dining table, reviewing last night's footage from our exterior security cams. Karen's outburst had been fully recorded, complete with her demanding our arrest over a garbage bin. What she didn't know, and what made this so useful, was that her escalating behavior might actually serve as evidence in the much larger federal investigation we were assigned to. You see, Chestnut Ridge wasn't just a pretty gated community with picky neighbors. According to recent intel, it was being used as a shell front to launder money through bogus HOA fees, fake property improvements, and inflated maintenance contracts. The HOA's leadership board had become our primary focus, especially after the sudden resignation of the previous president, Martin Ellis, who had reportedly gone off-grid. That's when Karen appeared, filling his shoes without a formal vote, claiming she had been acting vice president all along. No paperwork. No verification. Just a printed flyer declaring her the new HOA head. That was red flag number one. Now, with her obsessive interest in us, Karen had put herself at the center of attention, and her arrogance might be the very thing that cracked this case wide open. My wife joined me at the table and placed a cup of coffee beside me. So what now? She asked. She's going to double down, I guarantee it, I replied. We're going to be her full-time obsession until this either blows up in her face, or ours. My wife smiled. Well, she picked the wrong family. She was right. By mid-morning, Karen had already posted a massive rant in the Chestnut Ridge neighborhood Facebook group. It was public, we were monitoring all community channels as part of our operation, and it was worse than I expected. Warning, imposters in our neighborhood. The post began, followed by a long, paranoid explanation of how our family had refused to show proper homeowner documents, refused to pay fines, and flashed a fake badge at real officers. She ended it with a call to action, an emergency HOA board meeting to vote on removing us from the neighborhood. The comments poured in, a few blindly supported her, but many neighbors were confused. Wait, I thought they just moved in. Didn't they buy the old Wilkerson house? I've seen them walking their kids to the park every evening, they seem nice. But Karen didn't back down. By noon, printed flyers about the emergency meeting were being dropped in every mailbox. A bold headline in red ink said, "Take back our community." My wife and I stood at the window watching her march door to door, stuffing each flyer with an angry stomp. "She really doesn't know who she's messing with," my wife muttered. "Let her host her little meeting," I said. "Let's show up and turn the spotlight right back on her." Before the meeting, I contacted my handler, updated him on Karen's behavior, and uploaded our footage. He responded within minutes, approved. Engage under controlled exposure. Proceed carefully. That was our green light. The meeting took place that evening in the Chestnut Ridge Community Clubhouse, a nicely renovated building with high ceilings and rows of folding chairs. The place was packed, at least 70 residents, maybe more. Word had spread. Karen stood at the front wearing a navy blue blazer with a giant HOA pin that looked like it came from a novelty store. She held a clipboard like she was holding the Constitution. "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice filled with manufactured concern. "Tonight we must discuss a serious threat to the safety and integrity of our community." Murmurs echoed through the crowd. "Two new residents have moved into 117 Willow Creek Drive," she continued. "They refuse to register with the HOA, they've threatened law enforcement, and they claim to be government agents, which I personally believe is false." A hand shot up. "What do you mean, claim?" "They showed the cops a badge, didn't they?" another neighbor asked. Karen forced a smile. "People can print anything these days. I saw an article about counterfeit FBI IDs being sold online. I'm simply protecting us." More murmurs. She pointed a remote at the projector screen. An image of our house filled the screen, followed by a zoomed-in photo of me carrying a cardboard box into the garage. "This man has multiple surveillance cameras on his property," she said dramatically. "Why? What is he watching?" That was enough. I stood. The room quieted immediately. "I'll answer your question," I said calmly. Karen's face paled. "My name is Special Agent Nathan Walker with the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And everything you've just said is being recorded." I walked to the front and handed a copy of my badge to the couple sitting in the first row. "You can pass that around. It's real. It's verified. And yes, we do have cameras, because we're investigating federal crimes that we suspect are tied directly to this HOA." The silence was deafening. Karen blinked rapidly. "This is a violation of homeowner privacy." "No," I said. "What's a violation is what you've been doing since you illegally assumed power. Unlawful fines. Redirected HOA payments. No vote. No oversight. No transparency. You've been running this place like a dictator. But it ends tonight." One of the residents, an older gentleman named Carl who had lived in the community since the beginning, raised his hand. "Is this about the missing HOA funds? My wife's been saying something was off ever since Martin quit." Another woman chimed in. "And the landscaping invoices have tripled since Karen took over. We're paying more, but the work's getting worse." Karen looked cornered. "This is all a setup. They're con artists." "Really?" I said. "Then how do you explain these?" I tapped my tablet and sent a signal to the projector. Up came 3 documents: false maintenance invoices, an account ledger showing diverted funds, and a contract signed by Karen and her so-called landscaping contractor, who, by the way, turned out to be her boyfriend. The crowd gasped. Someone stood up and shouted, "We want a new board election. Tonight." Another yelled, "You tried to call the cops on a federal agent over trash day." Karen backed away slowly, holding her clipboard like it could shield her from the truth. But the damage was done. The meeting had turned into a courtroom, and she was guilty in the eyes of everyone. My wife joined me at the front. "This investigation is ongoing," she said. "But we encourage the community to begin documenting any past complaints, charges, or fines from the past 6 months. The department will review all of them." As we left the clubhouse, neighbors patted us on the back, shook our hands, thanked us. A few apologized for not knowing the truth sooner. But Karen? She disappeared out the back door without another word. And we had every reason to believe she wouldn't stop. Not yet. Because now, she knew we were watching, and she was going to slip. It was only a matter of time. The next 48 hours were electric. Our phones lit up with anonymous tips from neighbors. Residents quietly walked by our home just to get a glimpse of the so-called federal agents, and a few even came to the door offering cookies, apologies, and their own stories about Karen. It turned out, Karen's behavior wasn't new, just finally exposed. One man told us Karen had fined him $500 for painting his garage 2 shades too blue. Another said she threatened to sue his 12-year-old for riding his bike too close to a mailbox. A widow at the end of the block had apparently been bullied into selling her house over a gutter violation Karen made up out of thin air. These weren't just annoying HOA antics. They were part of a bigger pattern: control, intimidation, and the kind of power grabs that went unchecked for too long. As my wife and I compiled the complaints, my agency contacts were already verifying the shady financial links between Karen and a fake landscaping company listed in the HOA's quarterly budget. The more we looked, the uglier it got. Payments were being funneled from HOA fees into private accounts linked to 2 dummy corporations. And guess who managed those? Karen and her boyfriend. And here's the kicker. One of those dummy accounts had deposits that tied back to a federal fugitive we'd been hunting for 2 years, a mid-level accountant who vanished after embezzling millions from government contracts. Somehow, Karen's HOA kingdom had turned into a money-washing operation, using her bogus authority to shake down homeowners and channel funds into a criminal network. Still, we had to move carefully. The operation wasn't just about exposing Karen, it was about tracing the money, finding out where it was going, and seeing if other communities were being used in the same way. That meant leaving her in place for just a little longer, to let her get cocky. And as we expected, she did. The night after the board meeting disaster, Karen did something we didn't see coming. She broke into our garage. It was just after 1 a.m. I was reviewing camera feeds in my home office when I noticed motion in the side yard. I pulled up the live feed and froze. There she was, crouched in black yoga pants and a hoodie, flashlight in one hand, bolt cutters in the other, snipping the lock off our backyard gate like a burglar in a bad heist movie. "She's in," I whispered, signaling my wife, who was monitoring sound feeds through an earpiece. We stayed calm. Our kids were safe upstairs, and the house was secure. But this was exactly what we needed. Indisputable evidence of criminal trespassing. I switched on the silent alarm and watched as Karen crept into the garage, rummaging through boxes. She took pictures of license plates, poked through utility shelves, and then made the dumbest move of all. She tried to force open the locked cabinet that held our encrypted communications gear. She didn't succeed. But she did enough to trigger the motion sensors, which immediately uploaded the footage to our agency cloud. That was it. We had her. Not just for harassment or false fines, but for felony-level burglary and attempted theft of federal property. I made the call. Within 15 minutes, 3 unmarked government SUVs rolled into Chestnut Ridge. 2 agents entered from the main road while another circled behind the house. Karen was still in the garage when they flanked her. "Hands up," one of them shouted. Karen screamed like a banshee, flailing toward the side door, but it was too late. She was cuffed and read her rights while standing under the cold glare of our motion lights. "You can't do this. I run this neighborhood," she shouted as one of the agents pulled her away. "They're the criminals. They're spies." The lead agent shook his head. You just broke into a federal agent's home, ma'am. You're done talking. That was the last thing I heard before the SUV doors slammed shut. As the vehicles rolled out of the cul-de-sac, lights off, not a single neighbor came outside. But I knew they were watching. Curtains twitched, blinds shifted. Chestnut Ridge had just witnessed the takedown of its self-appointed queen. The next day, the neighborhood was quieter than I'd ever seen it. The HOA website had been locked down, its records seized, and the office at the community center sealed with federal notices. My agency began processing the evidence, and the internal audit revealed that nearly $380,000 had been siphoned from community funds into Karen's accounts over the past 16 months. Homeowners who'd been fined for absurd violations were now being contacted for reimbursements. Investigators even found tampered documents showing that Karen had forged the resignation letter of the previous HOA president. He hadn't stepped down, he'd tried to remove her from the board and then mysteriously vanished. That case reopened within hours. The fallout didn't stop there. Karen's boyfriend, the supposed landscaper, was arrested that afternoon while trying to withdraw $40,000 in cash from a linked account. He confessed within 20 minutes of questioning. Karen, however, didn't speak a word. She lawyered up fast, but the case was already too solid. She was being charged with fraud, impersonation, burglary, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes against a federal agency. She was looking at 25 years minimum. Meanwhile, my wife and I were asked to stay another few months to help monitor recovery efforts in Chestnut Ridge. We agreed. After everything, we'd grown to like the place, especially now that the poison had been cut out. Families waved when we walked the dog. Kids rode bikes freely again. One neighbor even hung a giant thank you sign on their front door. We didn't need recognition, but it was nice. What started as a trash bin argument had unraveled a criminal web operating in plain sight. Karen thought she could use fear to control people. She thought the badge I flashed was fake. She thought no one would stand up to her. But she forgot one thing: real agents don't back down from bullies. Not even when they come in the form of an HOA queen with a clipboard and a god complex. And Chestnut Ridge? It finally belonged to the people again. A week after Karen's arrest, the mood in Chestnut Ridge had completely shifted. For the first time since we moved in, people walked the streets without looking over their shoulders or whispering about rule violations. Porch lights were turned on again, kids chalked the sidewalks without fear of being fined, and neighbors started talking to each other like actual humans. You could feel the tension dissolve like fog under morning sunlight. But for us, the mission wasn't quite over. Karen's arrest had been a major win, yes, but her behavior had exposed more than just her own crimes. Our surveillance flagged a few HOA documents she'd hastily deleted 2 nights before her break-in attempt. Those records were recovered from our system backup and revealed she was in direct contact with a man known to our agency, a mid-level broker with ties to 3 other corrupted HOAs in different counties. That meant Karen wasn't working alone. She was part of a broader ring, one that used HOA positions as legal fronts to launder dirty money and exploit communities through fake fines, inflated property assessments, and bogus improvement projects. Chestnut Ridge had just been a piece of a much larger puzzle. And thanks to Karen's arrogant misstep, we now had leverage to dig into the entire network. My wife and I submitted a full 140-page report to our handler, detailing the infiltration, evidence, recordings, community interviews, and surveillance logs. Within days, our agency dispatched another task force to dig deeper into neighboring subdivisions. 2 more arrests followed. Different towns. Same blueprint. Same racket. What started as a trash bin fine turned out to be the key to a statewide criminal scheme. Meanwhile, Chestnut Ridge needed healing. The HOA had been left in ruins, its board dissolved, its funds frozen, and its reputation shredded. But something remarkable happened in the chaos. The residents, for the first time in years, came together. A group of homeowners organized a town hall, this time not behind closed doors, not with secret ballots or scripted speeches, but out in the open, in the park near the lake. Over 60 families showed up. Folding chairs were set in a wide circle. There was no podium, no gavel, just neighbors talking honestly about how to move forward. An elderly couple, the Harrisons, who'd been fined $1,200 for leaving a ladder on their porch, spoke up first. "We almost sold our house because of how toxic it had become," Mrs. Harrison said, voice trembling. "But now we feel like we're part of a neighborhood again." A young dad stood up next. "My son stopped riding his bike outside because Karen yelled at him one day. I didn't say anything then. I regret that now. But I'm ready to help fix this." It was moments like those that reminded me why we do what we do. You can't always stop evil from creeping in, but you can choose to stand against it. And when people stand together, bullies like Karen don't stand a chance. The community voted to create an interim HOA committee, made up of volunteers, all with transparent roles and rotating leadership every 6 months. Financial records would be public, meetings live-streamed, and no more anonymous fines or sudden rule changes. The HOA, once a tool for manipulation, was being rebuilt from scratch, by the people, for the people. Our job as agents was nearly done, but the neighborhood had become more than just a mission site. It had become home. We stayed a little longer than planned, per agency request, mostly to monitor any potential retaliation or suspicious visitors tied to Karen's contacts. But nothing happened. Her network had started to crumble the moment she stepped into our garage that night. The silence was proof. But Karen? She wasn't quiet for long. News outlets picked up the story within days. HOA president arrested in federal sting, the headlines read. Photos of her being escorted from our property in cuffs circulated online. Her face, once plastered across neighborhood newsletters and bulletin boards, was now the face of a criminal investigation. The media frenzy made it harder for her to hide. She was being held without bail, awaiting trial in federal court. Her attorney tried to spin it, claimed Karen was overzealous and misguided but meant well. But the paper trail told another story. The fines. The shell accounts. The threats. The break-in. The recorded audio where she bragged about making an example out of new families. There was no way out. She was going to prison. And not just for community drama, but for conspiracy, fraud, and theft of federal property. We got the official call about 6 weeks later. Mission complete. Stand down and prepare for reassignment. My wife and I looked at each other in silence. We'd both grown used to this place, the little routines, the neighbor kids who waved when we passed, the coffee shop down the street where the barista had finally learned our names. Leaving felt strange. But we knew there were other communities like this one, still under the thumb of fraudsters, still afraid of clipboard tyrants hiding behind the HOA's name. As we packed up our last box, Mrs. Harrison came by with a plate of lemon bars. "You two saved this place," she said, tears in her eyes. "I don't think anyone else could have done it." "That's kind of you," my wife said, smiling. "But the truth is, we just gave the neighborhood a little push. You all did the rest." The kids gave one last wave as we pulled out of the driveway. The dog barked from the back seat, tail wagging. I looked in the rearview mirror as Chestnut Ridge disappeared behind us, no longer a mission, just a memory. But as we drove toward the highway, my phone buzzed with a message from HQ. New location. New target. Another HOA president showing suspicious behavior. I laughed and turned to my wife. "Looks like Karen was just the beginning." She grinned. "Let's hope the next one doesn't call the cops over a trash bin." We drove on, the sun setting behind us, ready for whatever waited ahead. Because if there's one thing this job has taught us, it's that real corruption often hides behind fake authority. And sometimes, all it takes to bring it down, is one brave family who refuses to be pushed around.